The stagecoach rattled to a stop at the edge of the Lakota territory, dust swirling in the harsh Dakota wind. Inside, Margaret Sullivan pressed her trembling hands against the worn leather seat, trying to steady herself. The dress she wore, once cream-colored and modest, was now stained dark with blood that had dried into stiff patches across her bodice and sleeves. Her auburn hair hung in tangled strands around her pale face, and her green eyes held a wildness that made the driver nervous. She had boarded the coach 3 days ago in St. Louis, a mail-order bride traveling west to meet a rancher named William Hutchins. The blood wasn't hers, though explaining that seemed impossible now. The other passengers had fled at the last stop, their horrified whispers following her like ghosts. Only the driver remained, motivated by payment rather than courage, and even he wouldn't meet her eyes. "This is as far as I go," he said, his voice tight. "The settlement's another mile north. The reservation starts here." Margaret climbed down without argument. Her small trunk followed, hitting the ground with a thud that seemed too loud in the empty landscape. She stood alone as the coach disappeared back toward civilization, leaving her stranded between two worlds, one she'd fled in terror, another she didn't understand. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, golden grasses bending beneath an enormous sky. She had never felt so exposed, so utterly alone. Her intended husband expected a proper lady, someone clean and respectable. What would William Hutchins think when she arrived looking like she'd crawled from a nightmare? Movement caught her eye. A rider approached from the west, his horse moving with unhurried confidence across the open ground. Margaret's breath caught. She had heard stories about the Lakota, tales whispered in parlors back east, some fearful, some respectful, all painting them as formidable. As the rider drew closer, she could see he wore traditional clothing, his long black hair flowing free, a rifle resting across his lap. He was perhaps 30 years old, his face strong and weathered by sun and wind. 3 eagle feathers adorned his hair, marking him as someone of importance. His dark eyes took in everything, her blood-stained dress, her lone trunk, her trembling stance, but his expression revealed nothing. Chief Mtawakuwa, known to traders as Thomas Strongheart, had seen many strange things in his years leading his band. White settlers crossed these lands constantly now, bringing their chaos and desperation. But a white woman alone, covered in blood, standing at the boundary of his people's land, this was new. He guided his horse in a slow circle around her, studying. Margaret forced herself to stand still, though every instinct screamed at her to run. She had nowhere to go. Behind her lay the horror she'd escaped. Ahead lay uncertainty with a stranger who might reject her on sight. Here, at least, was something unexpected. "You're lost," he said finally, his English clear but accented. "I'm meant for the settlement," Margaret replied, surprised her voice worked at all. "I'm expected there." His gaze moved to her dress again, lingering on the dark stains. 100 questions must have filled his mind: whose blood, how it got there, what violence she'd witnessed or caused. But he asked none of them. "You'll die before reaching it," he said simply. "Night comes soon. Wolves hunt these grasslands." She hadn't considered that. The sun was indeed sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. In the growing shadows, the prairie suddenly seemed full of hidden dangers. "Can you help me?" The words escaped before pride could stop them. Chief Mita studied her face, seeing something there that made him decide. Perhaps it was the honesty in her desperation, or the way she met his eyes despite her fear. Perhaps it was simply that leaving anyone to die on the prairie, even a white woman covered in mysterious blood, violated something fundamental in his nature. "Come," he said, extending his hand downward. Margaret stared at that offered hand, calloused, strong, belonging to a man whose world was utterly foreign to hers. Taking it meant abandoning her plans, trusting a stranger, stepping into the unknown. But staying meant certain death, and she'd already survived too much to surrender now. She grasped his hand and let him pull her up behind him onto the horse. The Lakota camp appeared as the sun touched the horizon, a collection of buffalo-hide teepees arranged in a careful circle beside a winding creek. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and the sounds of evening life, children playing, women calling to one another, dogs barking, created a strange music that Margaret had never heard before. As Chief Mita rode through the camp's entrance with a blood-stained white woman behind him, that music stopped. Silence fell like a stone into water. Faces turned toward them, expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Margaret felt dozens of eyes examining her ruined dress, her disheveled appearance, trying to understand what their chief had brought into their midst. She wanted to hide, to explain, to apologize for the disruption her presence caused, but words seemed inadequate and dangerous. Mita dismounted with fluid grace and helped Margaret down. Her legs trembled from the ride, from exhaustion, from fear that had been her constant companion for days. An older woman approached, her face weathered and wise, silver threading through her black braids. She spoke rapidly in Lakota, her tone questioning and concerned. "This is Winona, my mother," Mita said to Margaret. Then to Winona, he spoke in their language, his words calm and firm. Margaret caught the tone if not the meaning. He was claiming responsibility for bringing her here, asserting his authority as chief. Winona's sharp eyes examined Margaret from head to toe, missing nothing. The older woman's expression was unreadable, but she gestured for Margaret to follow. Mita nodded his approval, and Margaret found herself being led toward one of the larger teepees, away from the gathering crowd. Inside, the space was warm and surprisingly spacious. Buffalo robes lined the floor, and a small fire burned in the center, its smoke rising through the opening at the top. The interior walls were decorated with painted designs and hanging pouches of herbs. Winona pointed to a spot near the fire and spoke words Margaret didn't understand, but the meaning was clear: sit, wait. Other women entered carrying a large wooden basin and clay vessels of heated water. They worked with efficient silence, preparing a bath while stealing glances at Margaret. Their faces showed curiosity rather than fear, and Margaret realized they must see blood-stained people more often than she'd imagined, warriors returning from conflicts, hunting accidents, the harsh realities of frontier life. Winona approached with a bundle of soft leather clothing and gestured at Margaret's ruined dress. The message was unmistakable: remove it. Margaret's hands shook as she began unfastening the buttons running down her back. The dress had been a gift from the agency that arranged mail-order marriages, carefully chosen to make a good impression. Now it was evidence of violence, a second skin she desperately wanted to shed. As the fabric fell away, Margaret stood in her chemise and petticoat, equally stained. She removed these too, standing vulnerable before these strange women who showed neither judgment nor revulsion. Perhaps they simply saw her as another person in need, regardless of the blood that marked her. The warm water was a blessing beyond description. Margaret sank into the basin, feeling days of terror begin to dissolve. The women helped wash her hair, their hands gentle but thorough. Pink-tinged water swirled around her as the blood finally released its hold. One of the younger women hummed softly while working, a melody that reminded Margaret of lullabies her own mother had sung before cholera took her. Taz came then, silent and unstoppable. Not from fear or pain, but from the unexpected kindness of strangers who asked nothing, demanded no explanations, simply offered basic human compassion. The women didn't stop their work or acknowledge her crying. They understood grief and trauma in ways that needed no translation. When Margaret emerged clean and dressed in the soft buckskin clothing they provided, she felt transformed. The leather was butter-soft against her skin, decorated with simple beadwork in earth tones. Her wet hair hung down her back in dark copper waves. She looked nothing like the proper mail-order bride who'd left St. Louis, and everything like someone who'd been broken and was beginning to piece herself back together. Winona studied the transformation and nodded approval. She ladled soup from a pot hanging over the fire, rich with meat and herbs Margaret couldn't name, and handed it to Margaret in a carved wooden bowl. The gesture transcended language. Eat. Restore yourself. You are safe here, at least for now. Outside, Margaret could hear the camp settling into its evening rhythms. Voices rose and fell in conversation. Children were called to their families, horses nickered softly. Mita's voice occasionally drifted through, speaking with various people. She wondered what he told them about her, how he explained bringing a blood-stained stranger into their midst. The soup warmed her from the inside, and for the first time in days, Margaret felt something other than terror. She felt possibility. These people owed her nothing. They had every reason to turn her away, to want nothing to do with white troubles. Instead, they'd offered shelter and care without demanding her story. When Winona finally spoke again, gesturing toward a bed of furs arranged along the teepee's wall, Margaret understood. Sleep. Rest. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight she could surrender to exhaustion. As she lay down, wrapped in the soft buffalo robes, Margaret heard drumming begin somewhere in the camp. The rhythm was steady and deep, like a heartbeat, and it carried her down into sleep more effectively than any lullaby. Morning came with birdsong and the smell of smoke from rekindled fires. Margaret woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until she saw the painted teepee walls and felt the soft buckskin against her skin. The events of the previous days crashed back, the blood, the flight, the unexpected rescue. She sat up slowly, every muscle protesting, and found Winona already awake, tending the fire. The older woman offered Margaret a wooden cup filled with something hot and fragrant, a tea made from herbs Margaret didn't recognize. It tasted of earth and mint, soothing her raw throat. Winona watched her drink with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see straight through to the soul. Outside, the camp was fully awake. Margaret could hear children laughing, adults calling to one another, the general bustle of daily life. She wondered what role she was supposed to play here, how long this sanctuary would last before questions became demands. Matu appeared at the teepee entrance, ducking inside with the ease of long practice. In the morning light, Margaret could see him more clearly. He was tall and powerfully built, with the bearing of someone accustomed to both respect and responsibility. Scars marked his arms, some old and faded, others relatively fresh. These were marks of a life lived fully, dangerously, without the protections of civilization. "You slept well?" he asked, settling across the fire from her. "Better than I have in days," Margaret admitted. "Thank you for taking me in. I know I must seem." He raised a hand, stopping her. "The blood on your dress. It tells a story. But that story is yours to keep or share." Margaret stared at him, hardly believing what she was hearing. In her world, people demanded explanations constantly. Every action required justification, every deviation from propriety needed accounting. Here was a man who'd brought a blood-stained stranger into his camp, and he asked nothing. "Why?" she finally whispered. "Why help me without knowing what I've done?" Mata considered this, his dark eyes thoughtful. "I have led my people for 8 winters. In that time, I have learned that people carry their reasons like stones in their hearts. Some stones are too heavy to speak of. Some should never be set down." He paused, watching the fire. "You ran from something. That running brought you here. What matters now is what you do next." "I was meant to marry a rancher named William Hutchins," Margaret said, the words tumbling out despite his offer of silence. "I answered his advertisement through a marriage agency. I'm from Philadelphia originally, but there was nothing left for me there after my parents died. The agency said Mr. Hutchins was respectable, established, looking for a proper wife." "And the blood?" Mito asked quietly. Margaret's hands clenched around the wooden cup. The tea rippled, disturbed by her trembling. 3 days into the journey west, the stagecoach stopped at a way station for the night. Mr. Hutchins was there waiting. The agency had arranged for us to meet before continuing to his ranch. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. He wasn't alone. Winona had stopped her work, listening even though she likely understood little English. Some stories transcend language, communicated through tone and the weight of silence between words. He had another woman with him, Margaret continued, forcing herself to speak. His actual wife, though she looked more prisoner than partner. She was Cheyenne, and the bruises on her face weren't old. When she saw me, she started screaming in her language, desperate and terrified. Mita's expression hardened, but he remained silent, letting Margaret find her own pace through the memory. Hutchins laughed. "He told me his business was collecting mail-order brides, using them until they broke or tried to escape, then advertising for new ones. The Cheyenne woman was one he'd kept because, in his words, nobody misses an Indian. He said I'd last longer because people might come looking for a white woman, so he'd have to be more careful with me." The teepee felt too small suddenly, the air too thick. Margaret stood abruptly, needing movement. Winona rose too, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder, a gesture of support that nearly broke Margaret's composure entirely. "The woman attacked him," Margaret said, her voice gaining strength from anger now rather than fear. "She'd hidden a knife, been waiting for the right moment. She went for him like fury itself, screaming words I didn't understand but felt in my bones. There was so much blood. His blood. She stabbed him again and again, years of suffering pouring out through that blade." "And you?" Mita prompted gently. "I helped her," Margaret said simply. "When the station keeper came running at the noise, I stood between them and lied. I said Hutchins had attacked me, that the woman had saved my life. The keeper didn't believe me, I could see it in his face, but he was alone and we were too. We barricaded ourselves in the room while he went for the sheriff." Margaret met Mita's eyes directly. The Cheyenne woman couldn't speak English well, but she made me understand. She drew in the dirt, showed me directions to escape, to find her people. But I couldn't follow her map. I panicked, took the first coach heading anywhere, ended up here instead." "The blood on your dress," Mita said, understanding now. His blood. From holding her back when she would have kept stabbing even after he was dead. From helping drag his body so we could barricade the door. I became covered in the blood of a man who planned to make me a slave, and I can't bring myself to regret it. Silence filled the teepee, heavy with the weight of truth finally spoken. Chief Mita stood and moved to the teepee entrance, looking out at his people going about their morning routines. Margaret watched his broad shoulders, wondering what judgment was forming behind that thoughtful expression. She had just confessed to being an accomplice in a white man's death. Even if that death was deserved, even if it was delivered by desperate hands in self-defense, the law wouldn't care about those distinctions. You cannot go to the settlement, Mita said finally, turning back to face her. If this man Hutchins is dead and you were there, the white man's law will come looking. They will not believe your story, especially if you tell them you helped his wife kill him. Margaret had known this, deep down, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. Then what do? I can't stay here forever. Your people don't need the trouble I bring. Winona spoke then, her Lakota words firm and decisive. Mita listened, then translated. My mother says you have already brought the trouble by existing. Running from it won't make it disappear. The question is whether you face it alone or with people beside you. Why would you stand beside me? Margaret asked, bewildered. You don't know me. I'm white, and your people have every reason to hate mine. Mita's expression turned hard as stone. Yes. We have many reasons. Your government breaks every treaty. Your settlers take our land, kill our buffalo, push us onto smaller and smaller pieces of earth. Your soldiers massacre villages, claiming they're protecting civilization. He paused, letting the weight of history settle between them. But you are not your government. You are one woman who helped another woman escape a monster. That is something I understand. Before Margaret could respond, voices rose outside the teepee. A group of men approached, their tone respectful but urgent. Mita excused himself, slipping outside to speak with them. Through the hide walls, Margaret could hear the discussion growing heated, multiple voices talking over each other. Winona moved closer to Margaret, placing a weathered hand over hers. The gesture needed no translation. Wait, be patient, trust. But Margaret's heart raced. Were they arguing about her? Deciding her fate while she sat helpless to influence the outcome? The debate continued for what felt like hours but was likely only minutes. Finally, Mita returned, his expression grave. The council wishes to speak with you. Some of the elders believe you should be sent away before the white law comes looking. Others think harboring you shows weakness, makes us appear allied with white criminals. They want to hear your words directly. Margaret's mouth went dry. What should I say? The truth, Mita said simply. They will know if you lie. Speak plainly, show respect, and let them decide. Outside, a semicircle of men had gathered near the central fire pit. These were clearly the band's leaders and elders, their faces weathered by years and wisdom. Some wore traditional clothing, others a mixture of native and European dress. All watched Margaret with expressions ranging from skeptical to openly hostile as Mita led her to stand before them. An elderly man with white hair and deeply lined face spoke first, his Lakota flowing like a river. Mita translated. Red Cloud asks why we should risk bringing the white man's anger on our people for a stranger. Margaret took a breath, steadying herself. I don't ask you to risk anything for me. I understand I've brought danger to your doorstep. If you want me to leave, I'll go. But I won't lie about what happened or why. She paused, making eye contact with each elder in turn. A man planned to enslave me. A woman who'd suffered under him for years fought back. I helped her because it was right, not because it was safe. Mita translated, and murmurs rippled through the council. Another elder spoke, younger than Red Cloud but no less authoritative. Swift Hawk wants to know what you expected to happen, Mita translated. Did you think you could help kill a white man and simply walk away? No, Margaret admitted. I didn't think at all. I just acted. Maybe that was foolish, but in that moment, I saw another human being fighting for her life, and I couldn't stand by. The translation sparked more discussion. One elder argued passionately, gesturing toward the settlement's direction. Another countered, his tone measured but firm. Margaret stood silently, fighting the urge to defend herself further. She'd said her piece. The decision was theirs to make. Red Cloud spoke again, this time looking directly at Mita rather than Margaret. The words were clearly a challenge, testing the young chief's resolve. Mita's response was calm but unyielding, his posture straight and confident. Finally, Red Cloud turned back to Margaret. Through Mita's translation, he said, You show courage standing before us. But courage without wisdom is dangerous. The Cheyenne woman you helped, Do you know what happened to her? Margaret's heart sank. No. I hope she escaped, found her people. But I don't know. And if she didn't? If she was caught and hanged for killing her captor? Would your help have mattered? The question hit like a physical blow. Margaret hadn't let herself think about that possibility. I don't know, she whispered. But doing nothing would have guaranteed her death or continued suffering. At least this way, she had a chance. Red Cloud studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He spoke again, and this time the other elders seemed to lean in, listening closely. When he finished, several nodded in agreement. Mitu's expression was unreadable as he translated. Red Cloud says you speak like someone who understands that choices have consequences. He says you chose to stand with the powerless against the powerful, even when it cost you everything. This is something our people understand deeply. He paused. The council has decided you may stay, but only until we learn whether the white law searches for you. If soldiers come, we will not fight them over you. Relief flooded through Margaret, so intense it made her knees weak. Thank you. I understand the conditions. There's more, Mitu continued. You cannot stay as a guest. You must contribute, work, prove your place here. And you must learn our ways, our language. If you're to live among us, even temporarily, you'll do so as one of us, not as a white woman we tolerate. Margaret nodded firmly. I'll work hard. I'll learn. Whatever you need. 3 weeks passed, and Margaret's hands told the story of her transformation. Blisters had formed, hardened into calluses, marked her as someone who worked rather than merely existed. She woke before dawn each day, helping the women prepare meals, process hides, gather firewood from the cottonwoods along the creek. Her back ached from bending over scrapers, her shoulders burned from carrying water, and she'd never felt more purposeful in her life. The children had accepted her first, their curiosity overcoming any cultural wariness. They giggled at her attempts to speak Lakota, gently correcting her pronunciation with the patience of natural teachers. A little girl named Zitkala had become her shadow, demonstrating how to properly tan a hide, braid sweet grass, identify edible plants on the prairie. Through these simple interactions, Margaret found herself learning not just a language but an entirely different way of seeing the world. Winona had proven to be a demanding but fair teacher. She showed Margaret how to prepare pemmican, that essential mixture of dried meat, fat, and berries that could sustain a person through harsh winters. She taught her which herbs healed and which poisoned, how to read weather in the behavior of birds, how to move quietly through tall grass. Each lesson came without judgment for Margaret's ignorance, only expectation that she would remember and improve. But it was Mitu who occupied her thoughts most often, though they rarely spoke beyond necessary exchanges. She watched him lead council meetings, settle disputes, plan hunts. He moved through the camp with quiet authority, never raising his voice yet commanding immediate attention. When he looked at her, which was seldom and always briefly, his dark eyes held questions he never voiced. On the 22nd day, a rider came from the east. Margaret was helping repair a teepee when she heard the commotion, saw people gathering near the camp's entrance. Her stomach dropped. This was it, the soldiers coming for her, the reckoning she'd always known would arrive. But the rider wasn't a soldier. He was Lakota, from a neighboring band, bringing news that sent ripples of conversation through the gathered people. Margaret couldn't understand the rapid-fire Lakota, but she read tension in their body language, saw worried glances cast in her direction. Mitu found her an hour later, sitting by the creek and trying to calm her racing heart. He settled onto the bank beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool evening air. The news is about you, he said without preamble. The man you helped kill, Hutchins, they found his body. The Cheyenne woman made it back to her people, told them what happened. She spoke of a white woman with red hair who helped her escape, who stood against a monster. Margaret's hands trembled. So they're looking for me. Yes and no. Mitu picked up a smooth stone, turning it over in his hands. The law wants you for questioning. But the story has spread differently among the tribes. You're being called the white woman who chose right over safety. Some of my people who doubted you now speak in your favor. That doesn't change the fact that if I leave here, I'll be arrested. No, it doesn't. Mitu threw the stone into the creek, watching ripples spread across the water's surface. But it changes something else. It means you've become part of something larger than one woman's choice. You've become a symbol, proof that not all whites see us as less than human. Margaret turned to look at him fully. Is that why you let me stay? To make a political point? His laugh was short and humorless. I let you stay because turning away someone in need would diminish who I am. Politics had nothing to do with it. He met her eyes then, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. But I'd be lying if I said I haven't wondered what it means that you're here. That you chose to help one of the people your government tries to erase. She wasn't one of the people, Margaret said quietly. She was a person. That's all that mattered. That's why you're still here, Mita said. That understanding. Silence stretched between them, comfortable despite the weight of unspoken things. Finally, Margaret asked, what happens now? Do I run again? Try to disappear further west? You could. Mita stood, offering his hand to help her up. Or you could stop running. Make a choice about who you want to be instead of just reacting to who others expect you to be. Margaret took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. She didn't immediately let go, and neither did he. I don't know how to do that. Everything I was supposed to be, dutiful daughter, proper wife, respectable woman, none of that exists anymore. Good, Mita said firmly. Those things were cages. You broke out. Now you get to decide what freedom looks like. Over the following weeks, Margaret did exactly that. She stopped waiting for permission to exist in the camp and started claiming her place. She learned to ride the spare horses, sitting astride like the Lakota women rather than side saddle like Philadelphia propriety demanded. She let Zitkala teach her the intricate beadwork patterns that told stories in color and design. She listened to the elders' tales around evening fires, slowly piecing together their history, their heartbreaks, their resilience. And she fell in love, though neither she nor Mita spoke of it directly. It grew in shared glances across cook fires, in his hand steadying her elbow when the terrain was rough, in the way he sought her opinion during council discussions even when others questioned why a white woman's voice mattered. It bloomed in the quiet moments when they'd sit by the creek at day's end, talking about everything and nothing, building understanding word by careful word. When the first snow came, dusting the prairie in white, Mita appeared at Winona's teepee carrying furs. Winter will be hard, he said to Margaret. These are for you. She accepted them, understanding this was more than practical gifting. In Lakota culture, a man providing for a woman's comfort spoke volumes. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. For asking no questions when I arrived covered in blood. For letting me find my own answers. Mita stepped closer, near enough that she could see gold flecks in his dark eyes. I'm asking a question now. Will you stay? Not as a guest or a refugee, but as someone who belongs here. Margaret thought of Philadelphia, of the life she'd left behind, of the woman she'd been who would have been horrified by the woman she'd become. She thought of Hutchins and the Cheyenne woman whose name she'd never learned, of the blood that had marked her passage from one world to another. She thought of Winona's patient teaching, Zitkala's laughter, the way the camp had slowly wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Yes, she said. I'll stay. Mita smiled then, a full genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. Good. Because my people need someone who understands both worlds. Someone who chose justice over safety. Someone who sees people, not categories. And what do you need? Margaret asked, emboldened by his nearness. He reached out, tucking a strand of copper hair behind her ear. I need someone who isn't afraid of blood on her hands if the cause is right. Someone strong enough to stand before a council of skeptical elders. Someone who makes me think about the future instead of just surviving the present. Margaret leaned into his touch, feeling the last pieces of her old life fall away. She'd come west as a mail-order bride, covered in blood and running from horror. She'd found something she never expected, a home not defined by walls or bloodlines, but by choices and courage. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the prairie in silence. Inside Winona's teepee, the fire burned warm. And Margaret Sullivan, who'd once thought her life's path was predetermined by propriety and duty, understood that sometimes you have to be broken completely before you can build yourself into something true. She wasn't running anymore. She was exactly where she chose to be.